Hey guys, how you doing today? Just got off work, went to the grocery store. I found a super great deal on orange juice, so I'm super pumped about that. Work has slowed right down after Christmas, so I feel like I got lots of energy after work now. Like over Christmas, I was coming home and just like, but now I feel like I actually got something, so I can actually participate in the world of intellect, because it takes energy to do this. Let me hop right in, talk about a subject I don't often talk about, but I think is worth talking about, certainly from a contextual perspective of the world, and something you should know about: American politics. Especially worth talking about American politics right now because the House, which is currently controlled by the Democrats, has actually passed legislation to get $2,000 checks to its citizens in the middle of a pandemic. And this is being lauded as like big success, and it's just like, oh my god, what a pathetic state of affairs America finds itself in, especially when compared to the rest of the world. And so it's worth discussing, how has America got to this point? How has America got to the point where they're unable to provide even the most basic necessities to their citizens, right? That is what we're witnessing in the United States. We are witnessing, some commentators are starting to call it a failed state, because they're unable to get housing and food to people in the middle of a pandemic. This is where other nations have been able to provide those services. I argue that here in Canada we could do a much better job, perhaps through something like a basic income, but we can certainly see down in the United States that the consequences of the governing body absolving itself of governance. So what the heck is going on? Why is the United States in this state of affairs? And moreover, why is the election of Joe Biden not going to resolve any of this kind of stuff? So to understand American politics, you really do have to go back to the very beginning, right? You just have to. And you have to frame it, and you have to frame what's happened with what is actually real and true. Because what happens so often when discussing American politics is that there's this glorification or idealization of the founding fathers, right? It's even in the name, the founding fathers. It has alliteration. They're set up as patriarchal figures to begin with. These were wealthy slave-owning plantation owners who came over from Britain and France and Spain and all these other people, but the founding fathers themselves were largely from Britain, who found their lives being built in America. They weren't going to return to England. They knew that their new home was here in the Americas, and they decided they didn't want to pay taxes anymore, and they didn't want to send money back home to Britain. They knew that they could become the rulers of this place, that they could live like they themselves, as slave-owning wealthy people, could live a life of freedom from the monarchy specifically. And so they set up a constitution as well as a legal structure that was designed specifically to allow wealthy slave-owning plantation owners to negotiate power amongst themselves. And that's the true purpose of the American Constitution and the American legal structure, right? It's built in. James Madison literally wrote that power should remain in the hands of the wealth of the nation, that it should not be possible for people who are poor, people who don't own land, to enter the political system, that the political system should always be run by the wealthy. And that has actually been successful. That has been successfully done. James Madison can rest in peace knowing that his contribution to the United States Constitution has been well secured and has been well taken care of. That power does not leave the hands of the wealthy. And this holds true all the way up. All the way to Lincoln, who, while a begrudging abolitionist, right, with the abolition of chattel slavery, fighting the Civil War in order to accomplish it, and I specify chattel slavery because while chattel slavery certainly is an abomination that needs to be eliminated from any society, they didn't manage to put up a front and fight back against the other slavery evil which was going on during that time and persists today, which is wage slavery. That the slave-owning plantation owners shifted the society away from chattel slavery, but maintained the system of wage slavery, which incidentally, if you go back and read the documentation during the Civil War, they understood that. They actually argued that chattel slavery was more merciful and a better form of slavery than wage slavery. Abraham Lincoln ran on a campaign of ending wage slavery. Wage slavery was very well known, and it's taken a lot of effort to eliminate wage slavery from the conversation, from the national conversation. It's taken a lot of effort to pretend as though the employees are not wage slaves. They are this other class, which is just a linguistic semantic trick. You're not a wage slave. Certainly you're not part of a wage slave system. You're an employee. And I'm not a master or an owner. I'm an employer. Right? Isn't that nice? Doesn't that sound nice how we have employers and employees? We don't have slaves and masters, right? And some places even go one step further with this linguistic semantic trick. You're not even an employee, you're a partner, right? Of course, you're a partner in name alone. You don't actually own anything. You're not actually a part of the business, and you can be disposed of very easily. Which was actually the argument used against wage slavery by the chattel slaves. See, the chattel slaves, the slavers argued that a chattel slave, if you run out of work to do, well, you still have to feed and clothe your slaves, right? You can't just get rid of them. Whereas under wage slavery, once the work is done, you can just get rid of you can just say goodbye, and they have to fend for themselves. And so they argued that wage slavery was actually more evil than chattel slavery, and fought a war over it. So we go through the Civil War, right? The system of wage slavery is maintained, and the Constitution is well entrenched that only the wealthy can be part of the system. Now, as we enter sort of the modern era, right, as we get through the civil rights movement, as we get through the continued barbarous treatment of Black Americans, right, the original sin of slavery, maintaining a stain on the American consciousness, and with a strong attempt to eradicate it from the American consciousness, to pretend as though, oh, that's something that happened so long ago in the past, hasn't actually continued through. But along with that stain of racial and racist policies is the economic stain, which is enshrined in its constitution, this idea that only the wealthy should enter the echelons of power. So we're jumping like way past, right? The Civil War, and now here we are in the modern era, which is a mistake. I should definitely talk about World War II, right? World War II ends up being a moment when America basically stays out of that war. That's essentially a European war on the European continent that spills into Russia, and Russia being the communists in Russia being the primary reason Hitler is defeated. That's not arguable in my perspective. People who argue against that are like, oh, sorry, bud. Like, I don't know what to tell you anymore. The Russians definitely take the brunt of World War II. They fight the hardest. They fight the longest. They lose the most people. They spend the most resources. We even have recordings of Adolf Hitler saying that the reason why they lost against the Russians was because they didn't expect the Russians to have such a heavy productive capacity. So literally, the Russian communism defeats German capitalism because it outproduces it, as stated by the loser, Adolf Hitler, personally. We have these recordings. You can go listen to them. And so, oh wait, communism's more efficient than capitalism. Interesting. Anyway, and the Americans end up just doing cleanup in World War II, right? The Germans are largely defeated by the Russians. The Russians don't have enough force or will to actually push back against the Germans. And so the Americans come in and they land against a German force that has been depleted, right? They are tired. They've spent a lot of resources. The Americans choose the right time to strike, and they do. And then, of course, they declare complete victory for themselves, even though it really is the Russians that end up being the reason why the German forces are prevented from carrying forward. The Germans can't defeat the Russians. So, but this, because of the destruction of World War II, right? The Americans are essentially the only people left with productive capacity. This what makes them a superpower for the next 100 years, right? Like not 100 years. It hasn't been 100 years yet. It's been close. 80 years, 70 years, 80, 70 years. Okay, whatever. But really, everybody else is just completely decimated, and so the Americans are able to essentially take things over through military force and really create their empire. This is the moment where they cease being like an insulated colony of their own that's looking inward, and they become an imperial force in the world. Which isn't to say, like, I mean, the founding fathers were genocidal maniacs who like committed a genocide and enslaved a people. So it was always in the American consciousness. But now they're able to take what they were inflicting on the minority populations in their own country and begin to inflict it on minority populations outside their countries. You know, you look through South America, which again, they already were involving themselves in South American politics. They already were going into South America and committing genocides and performing coups through that period. But now they're able to go overseas, right? Now they're able to plant a military base and call it Israel. They're able to destroy Iraq. They're able to destroy the Middle East, steal their resources, steal their oil, under the guise that they own the world, right? Like, after World War II, the American the foreign policy literally is first world, second world, third world. If you are in the first world, that's America and her allies, right? Second world is Russia, right? Because America really misses the opportunity to join forces with Russia as allies in victory post-World War II, and instead commits the atrocity of nuclear bombardment against the Japanese in order to scare the Russians, which completely backfires, incidentally. The Russians just build up their own their own nuclear capacity. And then the third world is the rest of the world. And the Americans made it very clear that the first world owns the third world, and the second world can keep to itself. And you can see this most clearly. Noam Chomsky points out, like, you can see this most clearly when China builds its own nuclear bombs. The Americans declare the loss of China. Oh no, we've lost China. We don't own China any longer. And you don't lose something unless you own it, which, I mean, anyway, so World War II, the Americans maintain an imperial force across the world, right? And this imperial force is designed specifically to enrich the wealthy in America. That's the whole point of it. It's not to help anybody. It's not to create any positive energy for any of the citizenry, because those people are poor. Who cares about them? It's specifically to enrich the wealthy in America by design and by policy, which is a carry-on of James Madison's statement that the country should stay in the wealth of the nation, right? And it turns out that the wealthy are willing to commit genocides and atrocities just as they were when Madison was alive, right? So this lineage carries through. So now we're in a moment where, okay, so you have a Republican Party and a Democratic Party who both work for corporate power. That's the whole point. Like, that's the whole point. You have wealthy people working for even wealthier people, right? Power stays in the wealth of the nation. And they pass the ball back and forth to one another. And you have to, like, the only times in American history when there has been a push forward on progressive policies or on policies of equality or anything like this is when the populace mobilizes and surrounds the White House, right? Which has happened in their history throughout the 60s. The White House was surrounded under Nixon. We have like recordings of Nixon saying like, "Oh man, they could just come in here," right? Yeah, and they could have. Maybe they should have. We have back in 2008 the upcropping of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which, while I support that movement, while I think it has been silenced from the media on purpose, because the media works for the wealthy, and if the wealthy don't want you to recognize and realize that the Occupy Wall Street movement actually carried with it a great deal of power, that was the moment when people really recognized that there was this delineation between the wealthy and the poor, and it was the first statement that the wealthy really are a small segment of the society. We are the 99%, is an explicit statement that there is 1%, an oligarchy that controls America, which is 100% true, and has always been true, right? Like, that's one thing. It's like, to make really clear, this isn't new. Like, none of this is new, right? There's always been an oligarchy in America. There's always been a small group of hereditary generational wealth that has been in the hands of a very small group of people, and that's always been true in America. There isn't a time in American history where that hasn't been the case, and they are protected by the Constitution of America. As much as Americans like to pretend like we live in the land of the free, home of the brave, all that kind of stuff, they live in an oligarchy where all the oligarchs come together in the House and the Senate to debate amongst each other about what should be done with the spoils of their wars. That's America in a nutshell. And so now we're at this point where what's actually needed from the government is governance, right? That instead of it being about how do we split up the spoils of war, now their attention is being turned to, well, how do we deal with the plight of our own people, right? And very clearly and very obviously in front of our eyes, right, Donald Trump, Nancy Pelosi, and Mitch McConnell, who I think are the three sort of figures who come out of this, have said, let them suffer, right? Let them suffer. Because there's no gain for them to help the populace. Why would they, right? They don't make any money doing it. They don't win anything doing it, right? They know that they're not going to lose their seat. They know that you're not going to, like, the populace is so weak and infantile that they're not actually going to stand up and vote against Nancy Pelosi or anything. Like, that's not going to happen. And so they basically just say, let them die. Like, let them suffer. Who cares? Because we're rich and they're poor, and that obviously makes us better than them. And that's, again, a continuation of this James Madison tradition of keep money in the wealth, keep power in the wealth of the nation, right? Who cares what the people think? America is run by money. It always has been. It's enshrined in the Constitution. And so why is it now that there's this $2,000 check coming down, right? So you do have a small group in the Democratic Party who have been deemed and like have been hit with this little wand called ding, ding, progressives, okay? People like AOC, right? Andrea Ortez, I always screw her name up. Alexandria Cortez. So sorry. Someone correct me for real. I'm so terrible. I apologize to AOC. I literally only call her AOC, and I literally only read her name. It's embarrassing. I'm an embarrassment. Ugh. Okay. So AOC, Bernie Sanders. These are the two sort of well-known bigger figures. There are others, but the two big ones are AOC and Bernie Sanders. They have begun to actually put pressure on systems of power, because now we are far enough away from James Madison that someone like AOC and Bernie Sanders are able to get into the halls of power strictly the way that one would assume a person like that gets into the halls of power in a democracy, which is that people vote for them. And people like what they have to say, right? And instead of big money able to just bury the competition, because things have gotten so grotesquely absurd, figures like AOC and Bernie Sanders are able to just stand up and say every other first world country on the planet has single-payer healthcare. We should too. And is able to say, of course it's not unaffordable. Every other country has it. Why can't we? And things have gotten so grotesque and so obviously out of whack that these figures are able to just move forward based on sense and reason alone, right? Against the moneyed interests, against the design of the Constitution itself. And now these figures, and there's not a lot of them, there's like 6, 7 of these people who even call themselves progressives, even though many, like several of them are obviously just doing it to pander. But the margins now in the House as well as the Senate are so razor thin. Like, people hate the Democrats and they hate the Republicans, right? They've been pulled. Everybody hates both of these groups. And so what you've ended up with is a House that is controlled by these razor-thin margins by the Democrats, and a Senate that's controlled by razor-thin margins by the Republicans, and a presidency that waffles back and forth, again, by razor-thin margins. Hillary Clinton loses to Donald Trump by, like, small, tiny margins, and Donald Trump loses to Joe Biden, again, with small, tiny margins, here or there. And when you have these small little margins, all it takes is a small group of people to actually stand up and say, hey, if you don't actually put a vote on the table for healthcare, or if you don't actually do something like provide a $2,000 check to people, we are going to vote against you in what your objectives are. So, for example, Nancy Pelosi's vote to become Speaker of the House is coming up, and the progressives could very easily stand up and say, no, there are 6 of us, you need 6 votes. If you don't actually put a vote on the table, then we are not going to vote for you as Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. And that would be a huge blow to Nancy Pelosi's power, right? Because Nancy Pelosi wants to be the Speaker of the House, because then she's got power. And unfortunately, because of the way the American system works, you have to play these petty politics because the system is designed to be petty. It's supposed to be petty because the assumption is that the people who have been elected into the halls of power represent companies like Raytheon, represent big, massive corporations. They don't care about the people. The people can die. And so this phenomenon of actually helping people outside of people surrounding the White House, a la the Nixon administration, and throughout the 60s and the protest movements of the 60s, is a completely foreign concept in American politics. American politics has always been about wealthy people working against the interests of the populace to make their own money. That's always what it's been. And they have no trouble turning around and celebrating the times that the populace stood up against these powerful oligarchs. Like, they've got no problem venerating people like Martin Luther King, who they assassinated. They have no problem standing up and venerating people like Abraham Lincoln, who abolished a practice that they willfully engage in overseas. Right? You think that you think these guys don't have chattel slaves? What? What are you talking about? Like, go to Africa. Like, yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. And not to mention their continued use of wage slaves, which for sure wage slavery. Like, why do you think they want you to compete with wage slaves overseas? Like, why do you think? So, and Joe Biden is not different, right? Like, he's not going to do anything to actually help. Which, so in the final minutes, this is where I land on in American politics, right? That the only time the populace has ever gotten anything out of their system in American politics is when they have surrounded the White House through popular will and popular force. Literally, it's the only time. That's the truth during the Union movement under Roosevelt. Like, Roosevelt didn't do those things because he didn't, like, pass the New Deal because he was a nice man. He passed the New Deal because his house was surrounded by communists and socialists, right, and unionists. Nixon didn't pass strong environmental protections and strong left-wing policies because he was a nice person, right? He did it because his house was surrounded by people. And it's the same here. No one is going to, no one in the halls of power are going to do anything in America because they're nice, because they're not nice. They're rich sociopaths. They are only going to start doing stuff if you surround their house. And that's the long and short of it in America. There is no political solution. There is no internal political solution, and there never has been, right? There never has been. It has always been hundreds of thousands of people surrounding the White House, surrounding the Congress, surrounding the Senate, and saying, do this or die. And that's always how American politics has worked. Should they redraw their constitution so that's no longer the case? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That should definitely be the case. Because if this is how you do politics, then it is only a matter of time until eventually your military and police forces simply say, well, we could just take this shit over. We can just take this shit over. Oh, you've gathered a whole bunch of people? Just drop bombs on them. Right? And if you think that that's not possible, it has happened in the past. It's been eradicated from American history. The first aerial bombardment on American soil was a corporation bombing its protesting workers. It can happen here, dude. It can happen, for sure. The American military can take a sharp turn and just decide that it's a fascist dictatorship. And up for debate that it hasn't always been the case. You can go see my videos about fascism and capitalism being the same thing. Okay, this is the end of me. Like, share, subscribe, send it around. If you are not subscribed and you have made it to this point, just subscribe. You're going to get more content like this. You're going to get more opinions from me. Please leave a comment, ask things, do all the stuff, hit all the bells, hit all the whistles. Yeah. Thanks for being here, guys. I hope you're doing well. Really, I do. Go high five somebody, smoke a joint, have a drink. Say hi to your neighbors. This one I haven't said in a long time, and it's absolutely the truth. Say hello to your neighbors, at least get to know their names, for sure. Bake some cookies and send it through your apartment building. Do something, man. Connect with people. Connect with people. You're going to need to. Because moving forward, like, you're going to have to unionize. You're going to have to organize. You're going to have to do it. It's what's going to have to happen, so you might as well start now. Good luck out there, guys.